Greetings, fellow human, Missy here. And if you're prone to worrying about things, or maybe you're worried about something right now, then I made this video just for you. I want to start this video off by saying that worry is a completely natural and normal part of life. It shows that we care. We are human and we should care. We care about the people around us. We care about the future. We care about outcomes. We care about what happens to us. And that's all good. But the problem with worry is that it can become really excessive and we can hyperfixate on it. And it ends up taking over our entire day and our nights as well. And our brain is just overwhelmed by all of these thoughts, and our body is tense and tired and constantly on high alert, and we can't rest. And we just end up being like a dog with a bone, and we just gnawing on it and gnawing on it and gnawing on it, but there's nothing left there. We just can't let it go. And in addition to feeling mentally and physically exhausted, we also can't be present in the moment. So we can't be present with ourselves. We can't be present with other people. We can't be present with what we are doing because our mind is constantly somewhere else, fixated on this worry that we can't seem to let go of. Now, before I continue on to what we can actually do about worry when it arises so that we can cope with it in ways that serve us better, I just want to make the distinction between worry that ebbs and flows with life events and worry that settles on you, like this heaviness that no matter what's happening, this heaviness is there and it sort of just gets more or a little bit less heavy depending on the day, depending on the moment. There is a really big distinction there. And obviously, there is a huge spectrum in between. But if you're experiencing that kind of worry, that intense heaviness, that overwhelming worry, and sometimes it's almost like this impending like sense of doom that settles, there's no source for it sometimes. Sometimes you can pinpoint a million worries, but sometimes you can't even pinpoint one. It's just this sense of doom. And if that is happening to you, if that's where you are right now, I would really encourage you to reach out to someone, reach out to a friend, to a family member, to a counselor, to a therapist. And if they're not the right person, reach out to somebody else because your life is not meant to be lived under this heavy weight all of the time. Whether you are leaning towards the former, where worry just ebbs and flows with life events and it's not this constant thing, it just gets very intense at times, or whether you are leaning towards the latter, where it's just this constant heaviness, please know that there is hope for those and anything in between. Now, getting back to what we can actually do about worry when it starts to get intense. And for this one, I'm going to ask you, and I'm sure the answer is going to be yes, that at some point in your life, you've been worried about something, and somebody has said to you, "Oh, don't worry." And I'm also like really convinced that just solved the problem right there. And then you were like, wow, why didn't I think of that? That's absolutely genius. Just stop worrying. Problem solved. And right there and then you stopped worrying and everything turned out absolutely fine and unicorns danced on rainbows and the world was wonderful. Why do people say that? Well, I'm not going to tell you to stop worrying because that would be like me asking you to stop caring. And I'm also not going to say that everything's going to turn out okay because life doesn't work like that. Things do not always turn out okay. But we can find better ways to cope with worry, better ways that serve us, that help us to live life, even though worry is present with us. What I am going to do is offer you some questions that you can ask yourself when you are feeling worried. And hopefully, these questions will help you to gain some perspective and to center yourself in the moment despite feeling worried. Question one: what am I gaining by worrying about this? Most things that we do in life, we do for some kind of reward, right? We create things because it brings us joy. We work because it brings us fulfillment. And if nothing else, maybe it just brings an income so that we can be fed and clothed and housed, even if it's not fulfilling. And we make time for loved ones because it helps us to feel connected. So those are all fantastic rewards for doing something. But what about worry? Why exactly do we worry? And as I said before, it's got to do with the fact that we care about things. But what is the reward for that? And the answer to that is usually that it gives us this sense of control. Humans like to feel like we are in control. And when we worry, it feels like we're doing something about what's happening. It feels like we have a little bit of control, even though most times we actually don't have any control. We come up with these elaborate and imaginative scenarios of what the future could look like, how this worry could eventually pan out. So, what if this happened? And what if that happened? And then what if I said this? And what if they said this? And then what if this happened and it turned like this? And then what would I do? And we don't just do this once, we do this so many times. You can think of it like a forest. Like we go up one tree and go up all the different branches in all the different directions. And then we go for another tree and all the branches, and we go just everywhere with our imagination. And we end up with this entire twisted forest of thoughts. And it's just completely overwhelming. And most of the time, these are things we don't have control over. We're not gaining anything by doing this, but we think that by imagining every future scenario, we might somehow be able to prepare no matter how far fetched they are. And if there's nothing we can do to stop them, we think, well, maybe I can mentally prepare for this. And for the things that we can control, worrying is just like pointless busy work for our brain while we put off actually doing something about the worry. And even if we've decided to do something about it, sometimes we can't do that thing straight away. And worry gives our brain something to do while we wait to be able to do the thing that's going to make us feel like we are actually doing something about what we're worried about. Answering this question for yourself helps you to understand what you are gaining, or more accurately, not gaining by worrying. And that doesn't minimize the worry. It's not meant to invalidate what you're worried about, but it is meant to give you some perspective and help you to see that there might be better ways to use your time and energy, ways that can actually help you to figure out this worry, ways that you can actually gain control over things, and maybe for the things that you can't control, to let go. Question two: what is worrying about this costing me? Now, if you've already answered the first question, this question is going to be even more impactful because you need to think about what you are missing out on or what you are losing while you put all of this time and energy into worrying. Also, think about how worry is affecting you. And as I said before, worry is normal. This is not meant to invalidate what you're worrying about. Some things that you're worried about might be really big and scary, like maybe a loved one who is really, really sick, or maybe the possibility of losing your job. And as I said before, telling you not to worry is invalidating. It minimizes what you are going through, and that's not the point. But think about it this way: whether you are spending hours and hours, maybe even the whole day and a lot of the night worrying, or whether you acknowledge the worry and decide to be present in the moment, life is going to go on. Either way, time is going to pass. And you can spend all of your time worrying, or you can choose to be more present in the moment. Maybe you can be more present with the person who is sick, or maybe you can be present with your friends and family and allow them to support you and encourage you as you wait for news about your job. Life is carrying on while you worry. So you may as well live as much of it as you can in the meantime, because otherwise it's just going to go by in a blur and you're going to miss out on so many things. Worry could be costing you quality time with the people that you love. It could be costing you productivity in your work. It could be costing you your health because you're not sleeping well. And the more of a toll it starts to take on your physical and mental health, the harder it's going to be to deal with a difficult outcome if that does happen in the end. When you start to tally up all of these effects that worry has on you, and you start to think about the real cost of spending so much time and energy worrying about this thing, it can be a lot easier to gain some perspective and see that continuing to gnaw on that bone is actually costing you far too much. And it can be a lot easier to be with it, to acknowledge that it's there, to say, okay, worry, I see you, I acknowledge you, but I'm choosing to be present in the moment, present with the people that I love, present with what I'm doing, instead of continuing to build all of these scenarios in my head of things that might happen. Question 3: what's the best that could happen? We are so programmed to ask ourselves what the worst is that could happen. And then we proceed to go on to all of those imaginative scenarios that we construct that get increasingly more far fetched and more catastrophic as we go into them. If you are anything like me, and I'm guessing that you might be just a little bit like me if you are watching this video, you probably need a little bit of time to process things. So your initial reaction leans more towards being more anxious about things as opposed to being excited about things, like when things are sprung on you. I always joke with people who are like this that if we used our powers for good, so our powers of instantly being able to come up with a million scenarios for the future that are really scary and catastrophic, if we could just use that for the power of good, like we would be unstoppable. And answering this question for yourself is one way that you can start doing that. So start using that big imagination for something really positive and helpful. As I said before, things don't always turn out for the best. But the thing to remember is that they also very, very rarely turn out for the absolute worst. And asking yourself this question can help you to get a little bit more of a balanced perspective on what you are worried about. Instead of using all your time and energy to think about all the possible catastrophic outcomes, you could answer this question and think about all the possible really good positive outcomes. And there is also such a thing as self-fulfilling prophecy. And now, of course, this really applies to very specific situations and it doesn't apply to things that you have no control over. But think about a job interview. If you are asking yourself what's the worst that can happen, you are probably going to go into the interview not feeling very confident, feeling very anxious, feeling very stressed, and then probably making silly mistakes and saying things that you regret afterwards because you are so stressed, because you've told yourself all of these negative things that could happen. And then you're just going to tell yourself, well, I knew that was going to happen. And again, it's a way of control because you're like, well, I predicted the future. And that gives you a sense of control. So you're going to carry on worrying next time because you got it right last time, didn't you? Or you could ask yourself, what's the best that could happen? So thinking about all of the really good scenarios, all of the wonderful ways that things could play out, all of the ways that this could go extremely well for you and the interview could be incredibly successful. And the funny thing is that you are probably going to have a completely different approach and demeanor when you do go into the interview. You are probably going to feel more confident and come across as more confident. You are probably going to actually be better prepared and you're going to answer the questions well. And if you do make a mistake, you are probably not going to see that mistake so much as the end of the world and focus a little bit more on the 99% that you did extremely well. And even though you are probably still going to be very nervous, it's probably not going to be the same level of anxiety as if you were imagining all of the worst case scenarios for every minute leading up to this interview. As I said, this whole self fulfilling prophecy thing does not apply to every situation, and especially things that you have absolutely no control over the outcome. But asking yourself this question does really allow you to use your creative powers for good, to use them in a way that encourages you and helps you to see that there are far more possibilities than just the negative and catastrophic ones. It puts your superpowers to better use. Question 4: how would someone I admire deal with this worry? What we admire in other people is often a reflection of what we already possess within ourselves. And even if it's not something that we already possess, it's something that we want to aspire to and we want to grow within ourselves. For this one, you can get really creative and you can think about absolutely anybody you admire. So maybe they're a book character, a movie character, someone you know or knew personally, someone from your faith or cultural background, absolutely anybody that you admire, and maybe it's for a particular trait that you admire them. And thinking about different people for different types of worries can be really helpful because different traits are helpful in different situations. So, for example, for me, there is a series of books called The Sword of Truth by Terry Goodkind. And in this series of books, there is a character named Kaylin, and she is an incredibly strong and independent and determined woman. And when I need those traits, when I'm worried and I want to have those traits that I admire in her, I just think about her and I think about how she would be thinking about this worry and how she would be dealing with. And that helps me to find those traits within myself because I know that they're there. It's just when you get worried, it's sometimes hard to find those traits because you feel very overwhelmed and you feel, depending on the size of the worry, you feel very scared. And in terms of people that I know personally, my dad and my dad in law are two of the most level headed people that I know in a crisis. So, whenever I am in some kind of crisis situation that I'm really worried about, I think about them and the way that they deal with it and how they manage to keep a level head. And that really helps me in those situations. That helps me to find that trait within myself. And it also helps me to remember to take action with what I can instead of just getting stuck in my thought and stuck in my worries and stuck in the cycle in my head. And I am really, really lucky that they are there, that I can also cheat a little bit and give them a call and ask them for some help and advice. So that's amazing as well. And I also think about a friend of mine who has been through some dramatic, terrible medical emergencies, and those have had really big, lasting effects on her life and her health. And yet she was so courageous throughout all of it, and she continues to be so courageous. And she never lost her sense of adventure and love for life. And I really admire that about her, that despite everything, despite every challenge she faces, she is still ready for the next adventure. And this really helps me when I am struggling with a worry that has to do with suffering or struggling with a worry that has to do with me needing to step out of my comfort zone but feeling afraid. And then I think of her courage and her adventurous spirit. And that helps me to think about the worry a little bit differently and find those traits within myself. And a last one for me personally from my faith is thinking about the lives of the saints, saints that I admire and incredible traits that they cultivated in their lives helps me to think differently when I'm worried and to think about how I can find or cultivate those traits within myself while I deal with this worry. Now, I really want to emphasize that this question is not about trying to make you into a clone of somebody else. And as cheesy as it sounds, you are you and you are unique, and there is absolutely nobody else like you. You need to figure out ways that you can get through worry and that you can manage it and cope with it in a way that serves you. And everybody's way of coping is going to be unique to them. This is just a way to gain a little bit of a different perspective on that. It's not meant to make you try to be a clone of somebody else. As I said, thinking about this person that you admire and their positive traits can really remind you that you possibly already have those traits inside you. And if you feel that you don't, it can encourage you to grow them, to cultivate them, to try to apply them in the situation that you're worried about. Question 5: when will I worry? This question is a way that you can put a boundary around worry, and that boundary can remind you to leave it alone until something specific happens. Most of our worries have to do with the future and about what could happen. And even though we have little to no evidence to support all of these scenarios that we make up in our heads, we just know that they might happen. And that feels like evidence enough for us, like it's already such a big possibility when actually it's not. We don't have evidence to support that. As I said before, when we start to worry, it becomes this spiral of just thinking about all of these future scenarios and all of these catastrophes and all of these things that could happen. And we just get sucked deeper and deeper into that. So when you find yourself getting sucked into that spiral of negative thinking, of all of these catastrophic things that could happen, ask yourself this question and then answer it with, I will worry when, and you can add some specific criteria to that. When will you worry? When is it a good time to worry? Here's an example to help you think about it. So maybe you accidentally cut your finger and you start to worry and you think, oh, what if it gets infected? And what if I get really sick? And what if I end up in the hospital? And what if I get really, really sick then? And what if I have to spend a really long time in the hospital? And what if I die? And what will happen to my family? And this whole scenario just plays out. And all that's happened is you've cut your finger. And I'm not invalidating all of the stuff that you're worried about again, but maybe set yourself a criteria that's realistic for when is a good time to worry. And in this case, maybe you could answer that with, I'll worry when I see any sign of infection. And the amazing thing about this is then up until that point, if that ever happens, which it's probably not even going to happen, you've saved yourself all of that time and energy worrying. So every time you go back to the worry, every time you think, oh, but what if this, what if that, you can say, no, I will worry when this. So it gives you freedom in the meantime until there is some evidence that you should worry. And when you get to that point, it's also very likely that at that point, there will be something you can do instead of worrying. So at that point in this example, you maybe see some sign of infection and you are straight off to the doctor. And then you can listen to actual medical advice instead of listening to Google or ChatGPT telling you that, yes, in fact, you are going to die from this cut on your finger. Another example is writing a test and feeling like it went really badly and then spiraling down into those thoughts like, how is this going to affect the rest of my schooling? Or how is this going to affect my qualification? Or how is this going to affect my future? What does this mean for me? Where am I going to end up? This test is going to be the end of me. And just to rein yourself in and say, no, I will worry when, and maybe you will worry when you get the test result back and it's below a certain percentage. And again, up until that point, you can save yourself all of that time and energy spent worrying because you've put this boundary around worry. You've told yourself that I will worry when this happens. And if you do get a test result below that number, then you can make a plan for what to do next. You've had a little bit of space from that, and then you can figure out what's next. You can think of it a little bit more rationally what the next steps are. But giving yourself that space is so important. Giving yourself that space where it's not necessary to worry now, to rationally tell yourself, this thing hasn't happened yet. I have no evidence to support that. I'll worry when this or that happens. All you're doing is deferring worry when there is nothing or nothing more that you can do at this moment. And that allows you to be in the moment more, to enjoy the moment more, despite the worry being there. You put a boundary around it, you put a fence around it, and you've said, okay, I see you there, but I'm going to be in the moment now. I'm going to live life now because life is happening now and I want to be in it. I don't want to keep going back and back and back and back to this worry that I have no evidence is going to even work out that way. And the funny thing is that a lot of the time, things are actually going to turn out okay. And you will never get to that criteria. You will never need to worry about that thing because most of the time it's going to be okay. There is a link in the description to a free guide that I've created called Start Winning the Worry War 7 Ways in 7 Days, just in case you need a little bit more help in terms of coping with worry in ways that serve you. And if you can think of any other questions that are really helpful to ask yourself when you're feeling worried and you feel comfortable sharing them, I would love to hear them in the comments below and your explanation for how they help you. If you gained anything from this video, please leave a like. And if you'd like to see more from me, please subscribe so you don't miss out. And if you would like to work with me as your life coach, I turn warriors into warriors. And there is a link in the description with more information on that. Until next time, remember that you, fellow human, can make a mind shift about worry using these questions and have a little bit more calm and peace and presence in your life.